You wake to the sound of bronze chains shifting against marble. Cold morning light filters through tall windows and your limbs ache, not from labor in fields or mines, but from last night's banquet where you stood for hours holding a wine pitcher while men discussed philosophy and politics as if you were furniture. You're 12 years old, newly arrived in Rome, and the silk tunic you wear cost more than most citizens will earn this year. Someone paid 40,000 sesterces for you 3 weeks ago. You still don't fully understand why. Before we go deeper into this forgotten world, I'm genuinely curious. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. It amazes me that we can explore these hidden corners of history together, connected across continents by the same questions about what humans are capable of enduring. This is Rome, sometime during the reign of Hadrian, around 125 AD. The city is at its zenith, marble temples gleaming, aqueducts carrying water from distant mountains, libraries filled with scrolls from Alexandria. But behind the grandeur exists a system of exploitation so normalized that poets wrote love sonnets about it, philosophers debated its finer points, and even critics who condemned it participated without shame. We're about to examine the lives of delicati, a Latin term that translates poorly as delicate boys, but which referred to male concubines, primarily children and adolescents, who occupied one of the most paradoxical positions in Roman society. They lived in luxury while experiencing daily violation. They received extensive education while being denied basic autonomy. They were valued as priceless possessions and discarded like broken pottery. Their story survives primarily in fragments, complaints from moralists like Seneca, legal codes regulating their sale, poetry celebrating their beauty, and the occasional tombstone hinting at emotions we can never fully verify as genuine. The slave markets of Rome operated with the efficiency of modern commodity exchanges. In the Forum Boarium, dealers displayed human beings on raised platforms, arranged by category and value. Agricultural slaves stood in rough tunics, their hands examined for calluses that proved work capacity. Gladiators were assessed for muscle and fighting spirit, and in a separate, more expensive section, dealers presented boys between ages 7 and 14 who had been selected for entirely different purposes. The evaluation process was methodical and dehumanizing. Buyers checked teeth for alignment and health. They examined skin for smoothness and color. Pale complexions were preferred, suggesting indoor refinement rather than outdoor labor. They tested flexibility of limbs, checked the shape of lips and eyes, listened to voice quality before it deepened with puberty. Syrian and Greek boys commanded the highest prices, particularly those with large, dark eyes, soft features, and natural grace in movement. Dealers prepared them like livestock for auction, plucking all body hair, applying cosmetics of white lead and antimony, teaching specific walks and gestures that suggested availability while maintaining an air of reluctant innocence that Roman buyers found appealing. One preserved papyrus from Egypt records a transaction in precise detail. One Greek boy, approximately 11 years, named Alexios, skilled in recitation, unblemished skin, trained in lyre, 38,000 sesterces. 38,000 sesterces represented roughly 15 years of wages for a Roman legionary. For comparison, a strong agricultural slave cost perhaps 2,000 sesterces. The price differential reveals what was actually being purchased, not labor capacity, but beauty, youth, and sexual availability packaged as cultured companionship. Once purchased, a boy entered a world of contradictions so profound they're difficult for modern minds to fully grasp. He might sleep on a soft couch in chambers near his master, while other household slaves huddled in cold cellars. He ate delicacies, dormice in honey, fresh figs from Africa, wine diluted with snow brought from distant mountains, while kitchen slaves received barley porridge. He wore silk imported from China, jewelry of gold and amber, perfumes that cost fortunes. Yet this elevation came with absolute availability. His body wasn't his own. His time wasn't his own. Even his thoughts and emotions were expected to conform to his master's desires. Training began immediately and encompassed skills far beyond physical servitude. Dancing was essential. Not folk dancing, but the refined choreography performed at elite banquets, where graceful movement communicated both culture and availability. Music instruction meant mastering the lyre, flute, or cithara well enough to perform at dinner parties. But the most intensive education focused on literature and conversation. A valuable concubine needed to recite Homer in Greek, quote Virgil in Latin, discuss philosophy with guests, offer witty commentary on politics and poetry. This education wasn't for the boy's benefit. It transformed him into an ornament that demonstrated his owner's wealth and taste. Martial, writing in the 1st century AD, described dinner parties where concubines stood nude beside dining couches for hours, holding perfume bottles and towels, available for any guest's pleasure. Petronius, in his Satyricon, depicts a banquet where the host casually passes a beautiful slave boy to a friend, as easily as offering a bowl of olives. These weren't depicted as shocking scenes, but as ordinary displays of generosity among the wealthy. Physical maintenance consumed hours each day in a ritualized preparation that was part grooming, part performance. Hair was styled elaborately using heated tongs, oils, and occasionally dyes to maintain youthful golden or black tones. Pumice stones removed body hair from legs, arms, chest, any growth that suggested approaching manhood. Cosmetics followed precise formulas recorded in texts like Ovid's Medicamina Faciae Feminae, white lead paste for pale skin that Romans associated with indoor luxury, antimony powder to line eyes and darken lashes, vermilion from cinnabar for lips and cheeks, expensive perfumes, nard from India, balsam from Arabia, cinnamon from distant Asian kingdoms, applied to pulse points. Some masters mandated specific diets to maintain slender figures or, conversely, force-fed boys to achieve the plumpness associated with prosperity and indulgence. Medical texts from physicians like Soranus of Ephesus reveal disturbing attempts to delay puberty and preserve youthful appearance. Repeated bloodletting was believed to maintain soft skin and delay voice changes. Herbal preparations supposedly inhibited body hair growth and muscle development. Some boys endured permanent hair removal through repeated plucking or caustic depilatory paste containing quicklime that chemically burned hair follicles, a process that left scars and caused chronic pain. When physical maturation inevitably occurred despite these interventions, consequences varied drastically. A fortunate few transitioned to other household roles: secretary, accountant, tutor to younger slaves, or steward managing household finances. Their education and years of close observation of elite behavior provided skills valuable beyond sexual service. But many were simply sold when their boyish beauty faded, often to brothels, where their market value would be extracted through volume rather than exclusivity, or to mines where former concubines worked themselves to death in darkness, their refined manners and literary knowledge utterly useless. The most famous concubine in Roman history was Sporus, whose story reads like nightmare mythology, but was documented as fact by multiple historians including Suetonius and Cassius Dio. In 65 AD, Emperor Nero kicked his pregnant wife, Poppaea Sabina, to death during an argument. Overcome with remorse, Nero noticed that a young slave boy named Sporus bore a striking facial resemblance to his dead wife. What followed defied comprehension, even by Roman standards. Nero ordered the boy castrated, despite castration being explicitly illegal under Roman law since Domitian's reign, though emperors existed above such restrictions. He dressed Sporus in Poppaea's clothes and jewelry, installed him in the empress's apartments, and conducted a formal marriage ceremony complete with dowry, wedding hymns, and witnesses. Romans throughout the empire were required to address this teenage boy as Augusta and treat him as Empress of Rome. But Sporus's horror didn't end with Nero's suicide in 68 AD. He became property passed between powers during the year of 4 emperors. Nymphidius Sabinus, the Praetorian prefect, immediately claimed him. When Otho seized power, he kept Sporus as his companion during his brief 3-month reign, apparently genuinely affectionate. Then Vitellius took control and planned to have Sporus publicly raped in the arena, while dressed as the mythological figure Proserpina, a death sentence disguised as entertainment for Roman crowds. Rather than endure this final degradation, Sporus took his own life. He was perhaps 21 years old, His entire adolescence had been consumed by being property of men who shaped him into fantasies he never chose. Most concubines didn't suffer such theatrical cruelty, but their daily reality contained its own catalog of normalized violence. Legal protections were essentially non-existent. While Roman law theoretically prohibited forcing slaves into prostitution if they'd been sold with a ni serva prostitutio clause, a promise not to prostitute them, proving violations was nearly impossible, and the clause itself only applied if a buyer specifically requested it and paid extra. Masters possessed absolute sexual access to their slaves regardless of age. The concept of consent simply didn't exist in Roman legal framework concerning slaves. A slave couldn't be raped by his owner because rape required violation of someone with legal personhood, which slaves lacked. Public visibility formed part of their function and multiplied their vulnerability. During banquets, concubines served as living decorations arranged around the triclinium, the three-sided dining arrangement. They stood behind couches fanning guests, offered silver bowls for hand-washing between courses, poured wine, and remained available for entertainment or use. Their presence demonstrated wealth because maintaining a beautiful, educated concubine required enormous ongoing expense, not just purchase price but daily costs of silk clothing, imported perfumes, jewelry, special foods, and the time of tutors and trainers. They accompanied masters to the public baths, carrying oil flasks and strigils, waiting in the caldarium's steam while their owners soaked and socialized, their nude presence another marker of status. At the theater, they sat at their master's feet rather than in seats, visible to all as prized possessions. Religious festivals provided no respite. During Saturnalia, when traditional Roman hierarchy supposedly inverted and slaves enjoyed temporary freedom, concubines often faced increased demands as masters hosted elaborate parties to demonstrate generosity and festive spirit. The Floralia, celebrating Flora, goddess of flowers and youthful beauty, featured nude performances where concubines might be compelled to dance publicly before crowds. Violence permeated their existence in forms beyond sexual assault. Masters could beat concubines for minor infractions, spilling wine, speaking out of turn, failing to laugh at appropriate moments, showing insufficient enthusiasm in service. Jealous wives and legitimate children often targeted them for particular cruelty, viewing them as living insults. Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius, reportedly had several of her husband's favorites executed on fabricated charges of conspiracy. Even other household slaves might abuse concubines, resentful of their privileged position, secure in knowledge that a concubine who fought back would be punished severely for disrupting household hierarchy. Disease spread rapidly through this demographic for predictable reasons. Galen, physician to Marcus Aurelius, described treating concubines for what modern medicine would recognize as sexually transmitted infections, anal fissures, rectal prolapse, and chronic pain severe enough to interfere with walking. His treatments, wine douches, olive oil, astringent suppositories of oak bark and pomegranate, provided minimal relief. Depression and anxiety, described as melancholic disposition and nervous exhaustion, were endemic. Medical texts included instructions for masters on identifying slaves at risk of suicide and recommended restricting access to rope, sharp objects, and toxic substances. Seneca mentioned matter-of-factly that prudent masters kept close watch on despairing concubines, not from compassion, but from financial concern over lost investment. Poison was a constant worry, not just that concubines might kill themselves, but that they might poison abusive masters. The Emperor Claudius's concubine Helotus was rumored to have administered the poisoned mushrooms that killed him in 54 AD, though allegedly acting on Agrippina's orders rather than his own initiative. Yet perhaps most insidious was how Roman society celebrated these arrangements through art and literature. Poets like Catullus and Tibullus wrote tender verses to their delicati, expressing jealousy, longing, affection, emotions that might seem to humanize the relationship until you remember the fundamental power imbalance. Statius composed an elaborate consolation poem when Flavius Ursus's young concubine Philotos died, comparing the boy to Ganymede and suggesting the gods had reclaimed their own beauty. These literary works present affection, even love, always within the framework of absolute ownership. A master might genuinely mourn a dead concubine while simultaneously shopping for a replacement. The architectural evidence from Pompeii and Herculaneum, preserved by volcanic ash in 79 AD, provides chilling visual context. Wealthy villas included specific small chambers for housing concubines, close enough to masters' quarters for convenient nighttime access but separated from family areas to maintain propriety. Wall frescoes show idealized scenes of beautiful boys serving wine, playing flutes, reclining on couches in poses suggesting languid availability. These images represent how Romans wanted to see these relationships: aesthetic, cultured, mutually pleasurable. The sanitized fantasy preserved in paint while the violent reality left no trace. Skeletal remains of young males in Roman burial sites show evidence of chronic stress, nutritional deficiencies despite access to rich food, and injuries consistent with repeated assault. Some show signs of deliberate castration, cuts to pelvic bone where surgical removal occurred. Though castration was illegal within Roman territory after 83 AD, wealthy Romans simply purchased pre-castrated boys from beyond imperial borders, particularly from Parthian and Asian traders who operated outside Roman legal jurisdiction. The economy intersected with exploitation in grimly predictable ways. Wars produced surges of enslaved children, temporarily dropping prices. Economic downturns meant masters might rent concubines to associates or brothels for additional income, or sell them to settle debts. During the crisis of the 3rd century, when Roman currency collapsed and hyperinflation destroyed savings, concubines became literal currency, traded for goods, used to settle debts, wagered in dice games. Tax records from Egypt show assessors evaluating concubines alongside livestock and agricultural equipment, listing them as household assets with estimated values. Some boys found temporary protection through strategic navigation of Roman household politics. Becoming the favorite of a powerful master offered relative security. Emperor Hadrian's relationship with Antinous, while exceptional in its public prominence, demonstrates how imperial affection could provide extraordinary privileges. Antinous accompanied Hadrian on tours throughout the empire, received honors typically reserved for family members, and was deified after drowning mysteriously in the Nile River in 130 AD. Hadrian's grief was so extreme, he founded a city named Antinopolis at the death site, commissioned countless statues, and instituted religious mysteries in the boy's honor. Yet even this unprecedented devotion couldn't prevent persistent rumors that Antinous had been murdered by rivals, or that he'd sacrificed himself in some magical ritual believed to extend Hadrian's life, that even in death, his agency was denied. By the 4th century AD, social changes were gradually emerging. Christian emperors issued increasingly restrictive laws about slavery and sexuality, though enforcement remained inconsistent. Constantine's laws prohibited prostitution of children, but exempted those already enslaved, creating a massive loophole. Economic factors, the expense of maintaining urban slave households, the shift toward rural agricultural systems, gradually reduced demand for concubines among all but the wealthiest families. Justinian's 6th century legal codes finally banned sexual use of child slaves, but private practice changed slowly. Church fathers like Augustine of Hippo wrote about the sin of keeping concubines while candidly acknowledging their own participation before religious conversion. What remains in the archaeological and literary record are fragments: a bronze mirror found in a small room in Pompeii, a bone hairpin, a child's toy alongside explicit wall frescoes in a brothel's upper chamber, graffiti scratched into walls that might be names or counting marks or prayers in languages we can no longer fully translate. These objects suggest humanity persisting despite systematic dehumanization, small assertions of selfhood in margins where no selfhood was permitted. Dawn comes again to those Roman villas, though now they're ruins visited by tourists who photograph marble columns and admire mosaic floors, without quite grasping what occurred in these spaces. Sunlight filters through windows where boys once stood in silk and chains, their beauty preserved in frescoes, their suffering unrecorded because it was too ordinary to document. We study what was normal for Roman male concubines not to understand Rome alone, but to recognize patterns that persist. The legal frameworks change, the terminology evolves, but the fundamental dynamics, economic desperation, legal vulnerability, social normalization of exploitation, continue in forms we've trained ourselves not to see. Those boys whose names are mostly lost, whose voices were never recorded, whose pain was considered too mundane to mention, they remain present in every society that convinces itself its cruelties are natural, necessary, inevitable. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes in cascading echoes across millennia. In the end, civilization and atrocity have always been intimate companions, beauty and brutality intertwined in every culture that learns to make horror mundane through the simple, devastating act of looking away.